Every NFL year, there's always a couple contracts that stand out above the rest. So today, let's talk about the 5 best contracts in this year's free agency period. Now, I am currently making this video on March 13th, aka Wednesday, so if there's a couple of deals that I end up missing out, you know why. So again, like I said, we're going to talk about the best contracts that were handed out. These are great values that are going to great players who I think perfectly fit the system they're going to. And we are going to begin with Geno Stone going to the Cincinnati Bengals on a 2-year deal worth $14 million. Last year, Geno Stone really had a standout year, collecting a ton of interceptions and being a prominent player on that Ravens defense. And for him to only cost $7 million a year, I really like this contract for the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a Bengals team that didn't necessarily need safety play, as they already had a couple guys there. However, they just really needed a playmaker that Jesse Bates was when he was on their team. And I truly do believe that Geno Stone could be that guy. And not only are you bringing him in on your personal roster, you're taking him away from a very good Ravens team that really probably wanted to bring him back. In fact, I'm a little bit shocked that Baltimore didn't pay up the $7 million to get a guy like Geno Stone because of how dominant he was last year. Last year, Geno Stone collected 50 solo tackles, 7 interceptions, and only gave up 25 receptions. And while he's not the best in run support, he is very good in coverage. PFF had him ranked as an 84.9 in coverage grade, which is really freaking good. Again, 7 interceptions and a small window of just 1 year is very good. And for a guy like Geno Stone, who's also super young, I do believe that this is a guy who you'd want to have on your team long term. Yes, he struggles in run support, and that is a bit of an issue. But for Cincinnati, when you already have guys around you who could be really good run supporters and all that, why not take a chance on a guy like Geno Stone who's fantastic in coverage? I wouldn't be surprised if within a couple years, if Geno Stone can get slightly better in run support, if Geno Stone is an all-pro level player. Next up, I want to move on to Kenny Moore, who just re-signed to the Indianapolis Colts on a 3-year, $30 million deal. Kenny Moore has been in the league for quite some time, and he mainly plays in that slot corner role, and even though he's 30 years of age, to get him only for $10 million per year is, in my opinion, a fantastic deal. Kenny Moore has been one of the best slot corners in the entire NFL, and when they're on a team like Indianapolis that has a pretty weak secondary, bringing a guy back like Kenny Moore on a really cheap deal is, in my opinion, very smart. Last year on PFF, he had an overall grade of 77.4 with a 71.5 run support defense, a 68.1 pass rush defense, and a 79.3 coverage grade. Now, that pass rush thing is kind of silly. I don't know why they actually use PFF for corners and pass rush, but it does tell you that he can do some cornerback blitzes if necessary. However, the big thing I want to talk about is that 79.3 coverage grade. He's one of the best corners in the NFL when it comes to being that slot corner. And when you're a team like Indianapolis that needs to find more depth in that secondary, keeping Kenny Moore is a very good deal. And when you compare his $10 million per year contract to a lot of the top corners in the NFL, you're talking about a guy who's getting paid similar to Kendall Fuller, James Bradbury, and Chidobe Awuzie. Those are all guys who are not even in the top 10 of their own position, so he's sitting around the 15 mark when compared to other cornerbacks in this league. When guys like Denzel Ward, Marshawn Lattimore, and Trevon Diggs are all making damn near $20 million, for a guy like Kenny Moore to only be making $10 million is such a good deal for a team that could desperately use that veteran in their cornerback room. Next up, I want to talk about Frankie Louvu, who just signed a 3-year, $31 million deal with the Washington Commanders. Now, the Washington Commanders defense is very weird. They have a pretty bizarre secondary with guys like Kendall Fuller and recently acquired Emmanuel Forbes. And their defense last year was poised to be one of the better units, yet they were absolutely horrible. They ended up trading away guys like Chase Young and Montez Sweat, and now you bring in Dan Quinn to represent your team as the defensive coordinator. You brought in Dorrance Armstrong to be your edge rush player, and now you bring in Frankie Louvu, who in my opinion is a fantastic linebacker. We're talking about a guy within the past 2 years who doesn't play defensive end or edge rusher or anything like that, yet he has 12.5 sacks, and over the past 2 years he's combined for over 100 tackles, over 30 assisted tackles, and has gotten an interception in last year. This year, he had an overall PFF grade of an 80, a good run defense grade of 74, a pass rush grade of 90.1, which is extremely impressive for a linebacker, and a coverage grade of 67.7. We're talking about a guy who's extremely versatile and very productive. Now, he's been playing on the Carolina Panthers, which is one of the worst teams and one of the worst defenses in the entire NFL, but being on a team with Washington that now has a couple really good players in this defense is pretty interesting. Defensive line wise, you still have your 2 interior defensive tackles who are some of the best in the NFL. You now add in a really good edge rusher like Dorrance Armstrong, and now you have Frankie Louvu, who's going to be used all around in Dan Quinn's system. I really like this fit, and to get him for just over $10 million a year is a really good contract, and I'm totally shocked that a team like Carolina wouldn't match that contract, or at least give him a fair contract to compete compete with that sort of contract. Again, Frankie Louvu in a Dan Quinn system, in my opinion, is going to be very interesting. I wonder if they're going to be moving him around a lot, not only just playing the linebacker spot, but sometimes even lining up on the defensive line and doing different things like that. I truly do think Frankie Louvu could be a significant weapon on this Dan Quinn style defense. Next up, my second favorite contract of this free agency class is going to be Azeez Al-Shaair on a 3-year, $34 million deal with the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans just lost Blake Cashman to the Minnesota Vikings, which, by the way, is another very good deal for the Minnesota Vikings. They've had a really good free agency period. And with Houston needing to find a replacement for him, they went out there and got Azeez Al-Shaair from the Tennessee Titans. Now, this is not only a very good fit within the DeMeco Ryans system, but we're talking about a player who's uber productive. Obviously, his best year in the NFL was arguably with the 49ers when he was under DeMeco Ryans, and it just so happens to be that he's reunited with DeMeco Ryans on this defense. He will be inserted into another prominent role on this defense, and I truly do believe this is a guy who can easily have over 100 tackles. He's going to be productive, he's going to do everything that a team like Houston needs him to do, especially on a defense that doesn't really have a fantastic linebacker. I truly do believe that Azeez Al-Shaair could be a top 5 to top 10 linebacker in this league under DeMeco Ryans. Last year, Azeez Al-Shaair had 108 solo tackles and 49 assisted tackles, and I guarantee you he's going to have very similar production this year under DeMeco Ryans. He also had a 73.7 run defense grade and a 61.3 coverage grade. And while Azeez Al-Shaair has never really been a fantastic coverage linebacker, I'm not too concerned about that, especially when you look at the linebackers in this draft class who are pretty damn good at covering passes, like a Peyton Wilson or Jalen Ford or something like that. Azeez Al-Shaair could present more of that big body linebacker that you'd want as your traditional downfield run stuffer. You put him in a DeMeco Ryans system alongside guys like Will Anderson. I really do think this is a perfect contract for a perfect player and the perfect fit. But lastly, my favorite contract of the free agency period, Xavier McKinney going to the Green Bay Packers on a 4-year, $67 million deal. Xavier McKinney will fill in at that free safety role where guys last year really were not that good. Xavier McKinney is one of the best safeties in the NFL, and despite the fact that he's a super young player, he has been in the league for what feels like an eternity. Drafted in 2020, this guy is only 24 years old and had a 91.2 coverage grade and a 70.5 run defense grade, going for an overall grade of 87.8. Last year, he had 94 solo tackles, 3 interceptions, and only gave up 33 receptions. And when you're a Green Bay Packers team that really struggled in coverage last year outside of Jair Alexander, you're now getting a coverage safety who's not only very good at covering wide receivers and tight ends, but can also go in there and make some critical tackles in the run. Xavier McKinney is somebody who we don't really talk about as being one of the top players in their position, but I'll make the case that Xavier McKinney is arguably the best player in his position. He's now going to a Green Bay Packers team that, like I said, desperately needed his type of style and their type of scheme. Xavier McKinney will be an instant impact player for not really a massive contract. 4 years, $67 million is not that bad of a deal. That puts him for an annual contract of $16.75 million per year. Not to mention, they also have a potential out into 1 year of his contract, so if it for some reason doesn't work out, they only have to pay him $25 million for this first year and they can get out of the contract. Now, that being said, he's going to work out for this team because it is such an easy plug and play player for a super cheap contract, and I do think Xavier McKinney will be their long-term safety to go along with Jair Alexander as their long-term corner. I would look for the Green Bay Packers to continue to try to add different pieces in not only the safety room, but also the cornerback room. Now, before I head out, I did want to hand out a few honorable mentions for a couple other contracts that I really do like, those being Jonathan Grenard to the Minnesota Vikings on a 4-year, $76 million deal. I also really like the Mike Onwenu contract to the New England Patriots. It's a bit of a bigger contract than I would have personally given, but New England needs to bring in as much talent as possible, and for them to retain Mike Onwenu for only $19 million a year over 3 years, very good deal. I also really do like the Saquon Barkley deal to the Philadelphia Eagles, 3 years, $37 million with a 2-year potential out if it doesn't go well. And the last deal that I really do like is Jon Runyan going to the New York Giants for a 3-year, $30 million deal. Again, another deal where 2 years in, you can potentially leave the contract if it doesn't work out. One of the better guards in the league, the Giants need guard production, match made in heaven. But if I didn't cover any of the contracts that you guys think are really good, let me know in the comment section below. But I love you guys. Peace.